Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to go and make disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimas.
And I'm Brian Rollenbacher, and this is a television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And if you'd like to support resources like 2819 and keep our show going, visit reasons.org/2819.
And if you came across this video on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button below. We put out awesome videos all the time. We want to make sure that you get notified when a new one comes out.
We also want you to be notified to know what shenanigans we're up to these days, but also to see some cool posts on social media. So you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at 2819 Show. We'd love to hear your wonderful and kind thoughts about the show.
And if you're new to the show and you want the podcast version, we got you covered. It is on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast and you can get us there.
Make sure you're searching for Google Play Music and you'll be able to find us.
Yes.
Search Reasons to Believe Podcast.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we want to let you know about an exciting new book. It's titled Humans 2.0. Let's check out this clip.
Extraordinary breakthroughs in biotechnology have improved the lives of people living with debilitating diseases and life-altering injuries. Soon, we could have the technology to fully repair or even enhance our bodies. To leave our old selves behind and usher in a post-human age. What would happen if humans merged with technology? Does transhumanism truly provide the answer to our problems? Or will it bring an end to humanity?
We hope you guys enjoyed that, and we hope that it sparked your interest in the book. I know I'm personally interested in it. I've already started it. I'm loving what's in there so far.
Oh, yeah. And you know what's cool is that Fuzz and Ken use some comic book vignettes at the beginning of each chapter to kind of help us get a cultural context of what's happening with the science.
Yeah, and that's definitely how to hook a nerd like me into it.
Definitely.
So. Well, in the months of July and August, you can get your copy of Humans 2.0 with a donation of any amount.
Just visit reasons.org/2819.
All right, Sandra, let's take it away.
We're going to hear from astrophysicist Jeff Zweerink. He responds to Bill Nye's critique of the word creationism and if it's dangerous for kids. So that's in our Nexus segment.
In RTB 101, Krista Bontrager will be interviewing astronomer Hugh Ross. They're going to be tackling the topic, why did God wait so long to create humans?
Yeah, that's a really common question. And what took so long if we're kind of the height of creation?
And why weren't humans and dinosaurs around at the same time?
That would have been fun. In our Give and Take segment, Jeff Zweerink will talk with Sean McDowell. He's an apologist and he's an author. He's going to talk to him about the strongest evidence for Christianity.
First up, we got Culture Talk. Sandra's going to be interviewing biochemist Fazale Rana, talking about the Netflix documentary, The Creative Brain, and we're going to be talking about human exceptionalism. So Let's check that out.
Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of science, faith, and pop culture, and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. And I'm joined with biochemist Fazale Rana. We're going to be talking about Netflix's The Creative Brain.
Yeah, that's a great documentary that's informative, inspirational, and even prescriptive, where it tells you, based on brain science, how you can unleash your creativity.
Oh, yeah, totally. I was watching it the other day. I was cooking, and I just had Netflix on. And here's this thing that came up recommended. And I was watching it, and I was surprised it wasn't a Christian documentary. It was, based on science, and yet it pointed to so many things that we talk about here. One of the things it talks about is the difference between animals and humans and how there was a change in the input and output in our brains that helped develop the creativity. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, this documentary was hosted and narrated by David Eagleman, who is a neuroscientist and who studies the brain science behind creativity. And he points out that it was our expanded prefrontal cortex that essentially created a separation in our brain between the regions that receive sensory input and those regions that then direct the animal to respond to that input.
So we have this change. They would call it an evolutionary change.
Yeah.
What prompted that change from an evolutionary perspective? Like, what would be the benefit of even that change developing?
Yeah, well, it looks as if what happens is when the input and the output centers of the brain are separated by brain matter, it gives time for that input to interact with other sensory input that the brain is receiving, as well as memories of past experiences or ideas, which represent kind of a coalescence of a lot of information. And that ends up triggering our capacity to be creative. And so for a rat, as an example, the input and the output areas are right next to each other, which means if a rat sees food, its response is going to be to eat the food. But when we see food, we then think about, well, is it possible for me to artistically depict the food? Can I arrange the food in a pleasing way? Can I cook the food or prepare the food and combine it with other foods to create, something that's completely original, that's completely different? And so that space and that interaction that takes place in our brain really makes human beings unique compared to every other creature that exists. And
the narrator even mentioned that. He said rats or animals of old are behaving the same as animals of today, but not for humans, at least as from an evolutionary perspective. Modern humans, as they would say, are behaving totally different. But again, like, what would be the evolutionary benefit for creativity? Well,
the standard evolutionary story would be that our creativity led to technology that allowed us to be able to expand as a species to cover the entire planet, to be the dominant species, that creativity led to our evolutionary success. But when you think about it a little bit more carefully, you realize that it's got to be more complicated than that, because human beings, when we first appear on Earth, though we're engaged in pretty sophisticated behavior, it was still hunter-gatherer type of behavior, where it was really very primitive, archaic technology that we're employing. And so when you live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, you've got to collect food, you've got to kill animals in order to eat. You can't afford to be creative. You can't afford to spend time making art, making music, learning how to dance and those kind of things. You've got to spend your effort trying to gather food. And yet when we look at archaeological sites for the oldest modern humans, they're just dominated with evidence for symbolism. And so it's almost as if creativity would, in effect, work against our survivability initially as a species, and it's only later that creativity actually leads to our capacity to dominate the world.
So when we think about the evolutionary response to why we would have creative expression, how can we then look at that in light of a Christian perspective, and how does the Christian faith explain creativity?
Well, to me, what is being highlighted here is that we are exceptional as human beings. We stand apart from all other creatures. And this is the biblical view of humanity, that we're made in God's image, that we're uniquely made in God's image. We're the crown of creation. We're different than anything that God has ever made before. And what separates us from the animals is the image of God. And I think creativity is very much part of the image of God. And so, because our God is the creator, and because we're made in his image, we're many creators. And so whenever we create, we invent, whether it is technology or art or music, what have you, we are manifesting the image of God. And I believe we're bringing glory to God. And one of the things that was really, I think, inspirational in this documentary was the role that people were using, or the use of creativity, I'm sorry, to help people that were in prisons to rehabilitate themselves. That these people viewed themselves based on the mistakes that they made that led them to wind up in prison. And that's how they viewed themselves. But when they had like Tim Robbins, who's an actor, come in and do acting classes, or a novelist come in and actually help them to become creative writers, that unleashed something in them that helped them to see themselves beyond just simply the mistakes they made. They began to see themselves as a whole person. And that's saying to me that we are compelled to create. It's part of our identity. And if we can't create, it somehow diminishes us as human beings.
Right. I think that's an excellent point, and I think it's such a motivation for us as creative people that we want to not only engage in creative acts, but we also want to inspire other people because it helps them get in touch with their true identity as being made in God's image. So thank you so much for talking about that. If you'd like to hear more on this topic, visit reasons.org and search human exceptionalism. Now we're going to head to Nexus, and Jeff Zweerink is going to be addressing Bill Nye's criticism of creationism. Let's check it out.
Big Think Forum produced a video called Creationism is Not Appropriate for Children, where Bill Nye, the science guy, is advocating and extolling the virtues of being well-versed in what the theory of evolution has to say. In fact, he's advocating that it's important that you believe it.
We need scientifically literate voters and taxpayers for the future. We need people that can, we need engineers that can build stuff, solve problems.
I could not agree more in this sense that it is very important, regardless of your persuasion or background or beliefs, that all people have a good understanding of what the theory of biological evolution has to say. You are not a scientifically literate person unless you can articulate that.
Evolution is the fundamental idea in all of life science, in all of biology.
One key aspect of that scientific literacy is in actually being clear in what the terms mean. For example, creationism actually comes in a variety of different stripes and flavors. There's the young Earth creationist view, where the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, that those days in Genesis 1 are 24-hour days. But there are other creationists who think that the scientific community largely has the record and the history of the events in the universe correct.
Here are these ancient dinosaur bones or fossils. Here is radioactivity. Here are distant stars that are just like our star, but that are at a different point in their life cycle. The idea of deep time, of billions of years.
There are lots of creationists who would be very comfortable with this progression of events. Creationism in general is really just the idea that there is a divine being and operating, working to make sure that various events and outcomes occur in the universe.
Once in a while I get people that claim they don't believe in evolution. And my response generally is, why not? Really, why not?
Just as creationism means various different things, has a diversity of meanings, so it is with the word evolution and what evolution means. What often distinguishes a creationist from an evolutionist, if you will, is the idea of what is the mechanism behind explaining this. The theory of biological evolution says that mutations operated on by natural selection, not only does it cause microevolutionary changes where organisms change to adapt to their environment, but these changes eventually accumulate or come about rapidly and bring whole new species. And so this mechanism is posited to explain the entire diversity of life here on Earth.
When you have a portion of the population that doesn't believe in that, it holds everybody back, really.
One thing that is incredibly useful, again, regardless of which side of this issue you come from, is to just ask good questions. When somebody has a differing opinion, we can simply just argue and yell and talk past one another, or we can engage their position, ask questions, understand what their position is, why they have that position. And I think as a society, we would benefit greatly from learning how to interact with opposing viewpoints, gaining that information, asking those questions that will equip us to make wise decisions for our future.
To listen to Dr. Zweerink's response to Bill Nye in its entirety, please visit the Reasons to Believe YouTube channel. And now it's time for RTV 101. This is the segment where we talk about practical questions to help train you to share your faith with friends and family more effectively. And here to help me talk about a very popular question is astronomer Dr. Hugh Ross. Welcome back, Hugh.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. And so one of the more distinguishing features of Reasons to Believe is that we believe the Earth is billions of years old and that humans appeared on the scene roughly about 100,000 years ago. So that leads to the question of, why did God wait so long? Why is there this big gap between when he formed the earth and when humans appeared? I'm hoping you can help us think that through.
Sure. Well, what I tell audiences, Krista, is that stars are like human beings. They're unstable when they're young, they're unstable when they're old. Only in the case of stars, the period of stability is an extremely tiny percentage of the star's lifetime. So you literally have to wait 4.57 billion years in the sun's history for the sun to be stable enough in its luminosity and to have a low enough flaring activity that human beings and human civilization is possible. That's one of dozens of reasons why God, in the context of the laws of physics he designed for the universe, waits 13.8 billion years to bring us upon the cosmic scene.
That's such an important insight, because I don't think that some of us who are not scientists have really reflected deeply on, hey, there has to be a lot of criteria in place in order to have complex human soulish spirit life that can live on a planet.
Well, to give you an example, I mean, to have complex life on a planet, you need a planet with sufficient uranium and thorium that it will generate the building of continents. So you have continents and oceans coexisting. That's crucial to recycle the nutrients that advanced life needs. But it literally takes 9 billion years of cosmic history for there to be the possibility of a planet with enough uranium and thorium within its core.
So I have to have the periodic table of elements first,
Yes.
before I can have human beings.
Well, the universe starts off with only hydrogen, and after 4 minutes, all it's got is hydrogen and helium. It takes 3 generations of star formation to build up all the elements you need for advanced life.
So it's almost like God was doing things as quickly as he could in the right order, in the right time, in the right way, so that he could arrive at human beings at just the right moment.
There's zero delay. I mean,
Okay.
we humans are here as rapidly as is possible in the context of the laws of physics that God designed for the universe. And keep in mind, he designed those laws to be tools to redeem us, not just to make a home for us, but to make possible our redemption. So you don't want to throw away those laws.
Okay, and so we need all of this time for us
Right.
to get to this moment. How does knowing this help us be a better evangelist? How does it help me share my faith with my non-Christian friends?
Well, it's not just the physical features of the universe, Earth and Earth's life, that's crucial for us to be here. It's the timing of all the events in the history of the universe, Earth and Earth's life. Literally thousands of different events have to be perfectly timed to make our entrance possible, which really screams there's a creator out there that has supernaturally intervened to make our existence possible, and screams that he must have some very high purpose for us human beings.
So it really reveals the intelligence of the Creator, his intentionality, and maybe it even brings us to that moment of creating a life support planet where there can be an act of redemption that happens.
That's it. I mean, the design is there not just to make our existence possible, but our eternal destiny possible. And that explains why all of us human beings have this inescapable sense of eternity within us. I mean, it's like the universe was all created to make us possible, but also to send us on a different mission.
I love that. Oh, wow. My mind just really expanded in this segment. Thank you so much,
You're
Hugh.
welcome.
And I do want to encourage you to check out Hugh's blog. Visit reasons.org and search for today's new reason to believe. Now let's go over to Jeff Zweerink. He's talking to our friend Sean McDowell about the question, what is the strongest evidence for Christianity? Let's check it out.
Hello, Jeff Zweerink, and welcome again to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we look at important scientific ideas to help equip you to be more confident in the truth of Christianity so that you go tell others. Today I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Sean McDowell, and we're going to just ask the question, what does he think is the strongest evidence for the truth of Christianity? Sean, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
Enjoy interacting. I got to say, it's neat talking to you, knowing the impact that your dad had in my life. He was one of the 2 top apologists, if you will, in my life. So
And who's the other? Now I need to know.
Hugh Ross is the other one.
Of
Lo and behold, I work for him.
Of course.
But no, it's great to have you here and talk to you. And I know you've kind of taken up in your father's tradition and look at how do you defend the Christian faith and spread that. And so I know we're here on set at AMP conference. We work down here near Biola, where you're a professor of apologetics there. And so I'll just throw the question to you. I know you're talking about this a little bit tonight. What are some of the things that you can do to talk to people about the truth of Christianity?
That's a great question. You mentioned my father. So one of the arguments that I heard a lot growing up, and he popularized in his book More Than a Carpenter, was related to the apostles' willingness to die for their faith, that they had seen the risen Jesus. Always struck me as reasonable, always struck me as a good argument. Why would somebody die for something they knew was false? Well, a few years ago, I was with a group of students at Berkeley, high school students, and we invited in an atheist to speak to our group. And one of my students goes, wait a minute, you don't even think Jesus existed. Why would the apostles die if he didn't exist? And he looks back at us and he goes, give me any evidence they actually died as martyrs. And my students kind of looked at me and I thought, I actually really don't know the answer to that. I should. I've always taken it for granted. I've heard it a million times, so have you. And I thought, you know what, I was actually looking for a PhD dissertation at that time. So I spent 3 years researching that. And I've come to believe that we've sometimes exaggerated that argument. We can't prove that all the apostles died as martyrs, even minus John. But here's what we know. We know they believed because they thought they'd seen the risen Jesus. And we know they were willing to suffer and die for this. And we know, in fact, that some of the apostles with good early evidence actually did. And there's no evidence any of them recanted. So this doesn't prove Christianity's true, but this shows this wasn't a conspiracy. They weren't making it up for personal gain. They wrote down and reported and shared, related to them truly believing they had seen the risen Jesus.
So let me press into that a little bit. You know, one of the key things of a scientific investigation is there's got to be evidence. You can make up whatever theory you want,
That's right.
but how do you test it? So what is some of the evidence that really does show that at least some of them were martyred and that they were willing to go to the cross, or not go to the cross, but willing to die for their belief that Jesus rose from the dead?
To pick up their cross, like I said. Of the 12, and Paul and James, I think there's 4 we can have confidence died as martyrs. There's 2 that are at least more probable than not. I would say Peter and Paul, and then James, the brother of Jesus, James' son is Zebedee. Now, the leading apostle who's quoted more times in the scriptures, and that there's the best evidence for, is Peter. So we have 2 first century writings, one at the end of John 21, where Jesus says, your hands will be spread out, and it's described how he would die. That's in the 90s, a Christian source. Then you have Clement of Rome, the end of the 1st century, probably written in the 90s. And then there's 8 other sources in the 2nd century to greater and lesser strength and clarity, but unanimously and consistently tell us that Peter died as a martyr.
And so the idea that those are the 2nd century kind of puts it up close to when it actually happened, as opposed to being some legend that developed, presumably.
Yeah, I did my investigation on really the 1st and 2nd century. When you go up towards the end of the 2nd century, you get past kind of this 3rd generation of what's called living testimony passed on. So I thought, I'm going to put the greatest amount of historical worth, so to speak, on sources that are 1st and 2nd century. And it's unanimous when it comes to Peter. So it's early, it's consistent, especially when you compare it with other historical kinds of documents. That number is pretty solid that we can conclude Peter really died as a martyr.
That's remarkable. So I've got to ask you, one of the things that I've always heard, that now that I have somebody who's got the expertise, always heard that Peter was crucified upside down because he didn't want to be crucified like Christ. Is that one of those exaggerations, or does that stand up under scrutiny?
The earliest reference to him being crucified upside down shows in a document called the Acts of Peter, probably AD 180 or 190. Now it's filled with all this other legendary material, but it's based around a historical core. Now you've probably heard the same that I heard from other people being in church, that he didn't want to be crucified like Jesus and requested to be crucified upside down out of humility. Do you really think the Romans took suggestions how you wanted to be crucified, right?
The moment I asked that of this question, I'm like, why would the Romans care what you thought?
Like, they don't care. So the point was, actually, the world had been turned upside down, according to this document, and that Peter could see it upside down, and then his death would help turn it right side up, in the way kind of mirroring Jesus' death. So we do know that there are some people who could be crucified upside down. It's not impossible. But later church historians in the 3rd and 4th century start relying upon the Acts of Peter as if it's historical. And I take a step back, I say it's not impossible, But I don't think we can include in any kind of rigorous historical or scientific investigation that this is most likely what happened.
So it sounds like there is some, as you go back and push into that, there are some not apocryphal or legendary or kind of flowery things that are interesting to discuss and talk about. But there is really some hard evidence that there were disciples of Christ that were martyred because of their belief in Christ.
That's right.
So you mentioned Peter. Can you just kind of rehash? What were the other ones that we're pretty confident of?
Paul. We have one first-century source in Clement of Rome, and then we have 7 other second-century sources. Again, early, consistent, unanimous, that Paul died as a martyr.
Okay.
When you come to James, the brother of Jesus, you have 6 sources, first and second century. But what's interesting about James is you have Christian sources, you have Gnostic sources, and you have a Jewish source, Josephus.
Okay.
So this range of different sources, to me, gives more historical credibility.
Be harder to pull off a conspiracy across those sorts of
I think it would be. It's just multiply attested. And then James, the son of Zebedee, the brother of John, is actually in Acts 12 too. So if Acts is reliable, and there's a very good case that can be made, and you also read it in Acts 12, it reads like a straightforward execution account, no flowery details, that tells me it might not be as strong as Peter where we have multiple sources, but that is almost certainly more historically probable than not.
Okay. So as we're wrapping up here, what does this actually get us to? Does this mean that Christianity is true? So we don't overstate the case. What is this? What do we need to be aware of when we're using this to talk to people?
So I'm so glad you asked this, because even any scientific finding from, say, like DNA doesn't prove the Christian God exists. It challenges naturalism and points towards some mind. Well, this evidence doesn't prove that Christianity is true. It doesn't prove the resurrection happened. It could be that the apostles had hallucinations. Like, that's possible. We still have to rule that out. All this shows is they really believed they had seen the risen Jesus, and they were willing to suffer and die for that conviction. They didn't intentionally make up this story to get themselves persecuted and some of them martyred. So I think it shows that they're not liars. They really believe this and are willing to put their lives on the line for the depths of that conviction.
It seems like that it really establishes one of those pieces of evidence that points to the truth of the resurrection, but it doesn't actually establish that it happened, if you will.
It is a part of a bigger case for the resurrection. It alone doesn't get us there, but I think it's one piece. Today there's so much fake news. There's so many people that lie to get out of trouble and have personal gain. I want to ask people, if the apostles really made this up, why do you think they made it up? That's a good question, at least, to get people thinking.
Well, thanks, Sean. I appreciate your comments.
You bet.
You know, our claim and our stance and our position at RTB is that there really is strong evidence to support the truth of the Christian faith. And one of those central claims of the Christian faith is that Jesus rose from the dead. The idea that many disciples of Christ were willing to die to attest to that is a powerful evidence in support of Christianity. You know, I would encourage you to go check out SeanMcDowell.org. There's a lot of resources you can pick up there, but one of them that is very powerful is a resource called Evidence That Demands a Verdict, the second edition, and it has a chapter that talks about the evidence for the apostles' martyrdom in support of Christ's resurrection. Pick that up so you can be equipped to share the gospel with those God brings across your path.
And that does it for us this week on 2819.
Another episode done, and we hope that you've enjoyed it and really been inspired to go out and share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And remember, if you want to support resources like this show, or if you want any of the show notes, or if you want to get some more information on Humans 2.0, go to reasons.org/2819.
And don't forget, connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at 2819 Show. We'll take some behind-the-scenes photos, and we'd love for you to check them out. So connect with us there.
See you all next time.
Bye.